Hey, we're talking about lessons in navigating opposition, resistance, hardship, struggles. What are some lessons? This is our last episode in this series. I think it's been extremely powerful, and we've been looking at Joseph as an example. Things to do, lessons we can apply in our lives, looking at Joseph and the experiences he had and what he did. So we're wrapping up this series by looking at Joseph going from prison to the palace, right? And you're like, what does that mean? Well, if you look at Genesis 39, verses 20 through 23, God gives Joseph favor again. And in this situation, Joseph was in prison, and we don't know how long exactly he was in prison, but, he wanted to get out of prison, understandably. And he has an opportunity because Pharaoh has a dream. And one of the servants around Pharaoh remembered Joseph in prison because Joseph had interpreted his dream. And so the servant tells Pharaoh, hey, I know a guy. I remember this dude in prison. He interpreted my dream and it came to pass. And he can help potentially maybe interpret your dream, Pharaoh. So Pharaoh was very disturbed by this dream and summoned Joseph to interpret the dream. Actually, it's two dreams. And when Joseph comes to Pharaoh, he comes from the prison and comes to the palace. Pharaoh is the king of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh tells Joseph his dream. And Joseph interprets both dreams. And is a really powerful interpretation. And I think what happens here is when Joseph interprets these dreams to Pharaoh, and Joseph says, at the end of the interpretation, Pharaoh would be wise to find a man who could organize all of the resources for the upcoming plentiful years and build storehouses so that there's abundance during the years that are coming afterwards, the years of famine. And Pharaoh's like, who better can we find it but you? And Joseph is promoted, right? So you look at Joseph's life, and at the beginning of this whole series, we talked about the outcomes versus the beginning, the results of Joseph's life. And we can see these results now because Joseph is promoted to second in the land. Joseph preserves the nation of Egypt during a whole huge, tremendous 7 years of famine. He preserves his own family, brings them down to Egypt to rescue them from starvation. He sees his dad again. He's reconciled with his dad. And there's redemption too, because Joseph talks to his brothers and says, you guys meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. The salvation of many souls. And so you see these tremendous outcomes, but there's a whole lot of opposition that went into these outcomes before he ever had the outcomes. But I think there's some important things to consider. One of the things I think is so important, not only does God give favor to Joseph, but I think it's interesting to think about Joseph stayed true to who God made him and true to the gifts that God had put inside of him. So, for example, at the beginning of his life, we are introduced to him with all of his dream interpretation, or dreams, right? He gives the dreams to his brothers, he gives the dreams to his dad, and that goes poorly for him. And at that point, you'd be like, yeah, maybe we stop with the whole dream thing because, it's bad results. But Joseph doesn't give up on interpreting dreams because we see him. He keeps his integrity and he works hard. But when he's in prison, he interprets two more dreams, the cupbearer and the baker for Pharaoh. And as he interprets their dreams, both of these dreams come true. And he tells the one servant that goes back to Pharaoh, he's like, don't forget me down here. I was unjustly accused and I'm here wrongfully. So please remember me when you get back to Pharaoh's house and get me out of here. But that doesn't happen. And so I think Joseph, he could have easily said, I'm going to quit with the whole dream thing. It didn't pan out well with my family. And now here in prison, it's not panning out well. I'm still stuck here. And he could get bitter and angry and dismissive with the gifts that God has put in him. But he doesn't. He doesn't. When he gets called in front of Pharaoh, he continues with that gift. And he says, here's the interpretation. And it is God who has given me the gift. It is God who gives the interpretation, not me. He recognizes God's gifting on his life. And so I think when we look at Joseph, he doesn't dismiss or ignore or throw away the gifts that God has put on his life. Joseph maintains his integrity. He continues to work hard. And I think these are all lessons for us when we go through opposition, when we hit, the pit, when we hit prison, when we hit unjust accusation, when bad things happen. When all this stuff happens, keep your integrity, continue to work hard, and recognize and appreciate, value the gifts that God has put on your life. Hey, it's a joke break. Stop. Hold on. Pause for just a second. We're interrupting to give you this phenomenal joke. I say, again, dripping with sarcasm. So, here's your joke. Why is it that your nose runs, but your feet smell? You're like, why does your nose run, but your feet smell? Think about it. It's a fun quandary, a little bit of a quirky joke. Because ultimately, the outcomes from all these oppositions, the outcomes far outweigh the opposition, the struggles, and the hardships. And again, God has redemption through all of the opposition to work tremendous results, tremendous salvation for nations, for people, for families, even though we go through opposition and hardship. So as we think about this, the final lesson I would say is that we see from Joseph is stay faithful with the gifts that God has put in your life. Stay faithful. God has given you these gifts, so stay faithful with them. We see that with Joseph, and we see the outcomes have tremendous divine benefits and divine fingerprints all over. So no matter the opposition, God can still continue to work redemption, and we can learn from these lessons on navigating opposition. Make sure you kind of stay tuned for next week, because we're going to start a brand new series and you totally don't want to miss it. You're like, what's it about? I'm not going to tell you. You have to watch and see, because it's going to be phenomenal.